Is the inquiry being watered down, Prime Minister?
In another blow to the government's grooming gang inquiry, this morning a fourth survivor resigned from the very panel designed to put their voices at its heart. Like others, Jessica, not her real name, accused the government of trying to water the inquiry down and widen its scope beyond grooming gangs to other child sexual abuse victims. Perhaps, she said, to downplay the ethnicity of some perpetrators.
Every time we're asked to relive these horrific events, it's heartbreaking. And yet, even now, we're being told not to speak out, to stay quiet. It feels like we're being silenced all over again.
Yesterday, we spoke to Fiona Goddard, one of the first to resign.
If my voice isn't going to be heard while I'm on the panel, I'll make sure it's heard outside it.
The Home Office denied the scope would be widened. Today, the leader of the opposition put Fiona's words to the Prime Minister.
Fiona's question is simple. What's the point in speaking up if we're just going to be called liars?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising that on behalf of Fiona, and let me give Fiona and the House my answer, Mr Speaker. Should they wish to return, the door will always be open. But even if they do not, we owe it to them and to Fiona and to the country to answer the concerns that they have raised. The inquiry is not and will never be watered down. Its scope will not change. It will examine the ethnicity and religion of the offenders, and we will find the right person to chair the inquiry.
There have been previous inquiries on grooming at a local level and on child sexual exploitation at a national level, but never a national inquiry with a focus solely on grooming gangs. Calls for one intensified in January this year from the Conservative leader, among others, and supported by billionaire Elon Musk, who uses his platform X regularly to post about grooming gangs. It was in June that the government announced a full statutory inquiry following an independent audit by Baroness Louise Casey, with the government promising to follow her recommendations. Today, Sir Keir Starmer announced that he would bring her back in to oversee the inquiry's work. The government is also facing a huge roadblock over the process of appointing a chair. One candidate, a former social worker, stood back over survivors' fears that she might pose a conflict of interest because, of course, this inquiry will look at failings within the care system. That left another candidate, a former police chief who's a child abuse expert. Again, his background in policing was perceived by some to be a conflict of interest, given this inquiry would look too at police failings. This afternoon, he stood back as well, leaving no one in the frame. In a statement, former police chief Jim Gamble cited the toxic environment surrounding the process, which he said was defined by vested interests, political opportunism and point scoring, rather than by the cross-party consensus required to address such a serious national issue. We spoke to one of the survivors still on the panel, who we're calling Carly, and who told us she's frustrated the inquiry hasn't got off the ground in the way she'd like.
It's causing a divide between everyone. It's causing a divide in politics. It's causing a divide between the survivors. It's causing a divide between the public. It could also cause a divide and cause a lot of racism issues.
So you're frustrated at the way the conversation around this is happening?
I'm frustrated in it all. But obviously I'm very limited in what I can say because of the confidentiality agreement. But I just think it needs to be run better.
But you're still deciding to stay on the panel. Why is that?
Because if you want to see change, and I have ummed and ahed about staying on the panel or not, but I want to see change, and I've been fighting it for so long, so you've got to be in it to see a change.
Today, Sir Keir Starmer backed his safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips over her handling of the inquiry. An inquiry tonight struggling to get off the ground.
Well, another survivor who quit the inquiry process goes by the name Elizabeth, who was abused by grooming gangs in Rotherham. She withdrew yesterday after meeting Jim Gamble, who was then still in the running to be chair. Her words were also put to Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions today. She began by telling me about the historic abuse she'd suffered and a warning there are distressing details from the beginning.
In the early 2000s, I became a victim of a lady that was already known to authorities for years before I came along. She groomed me and facilitated me and prepared me to be raped by men, and I was locked in her flat for 10 weeks. During that period of time, my mum and dad had called the police over 200 times, and instead the only adult from that time that got blamed for my abuse was my own dad when he got arrested twice for it.
How do you feel about where we are now with this national inquiry seemingly sort of unravelling before us?
From the very start, I was quite negative around it because I did want one. We deserve one, but I wasn't sure how it would actually work out. How I'm feeling now is totally let down.
You actually met the last remaining candidate, as he was then yesterday, Jim Gamble. How did that meeting go? You and the other survivors got a chance to ask him some questions.
I don't want to be negative about Jim at all. He knows his stuff, very good at what he does and what he's done in the past, but I felt like it was very, very scripted and planned.
And did you have reservations about his background in policing?
Absolutely, yeah. He's done some very, very important work, but we shouldn't be seeing social workers, we shouldn't be seeing people that may have seen this crime. Example, the police, because how is that impartial? They've had that background.
Jim Gamble, he has said many of the victims and survivors were being disrespected and misinformed. Do you think that you've been misinformed by anyone who's trying to mislead you?
Absolutely not. I've come to the decision based on the evidence that I've seen.
Do you worry at all that this has now become, and you used the word toxic when you quit, Jim Gamble, who was the last person who could have been the chair, as we know it, used the word toxic. Do you think this whole thing has become too toxic to actually work?
Absolutely. It has become toxic. It's a toxic environment with a lot of pressure applied to those that don't need it, who have been through enough, and it should have been handled in a total different way.
Elizabeth. Oh, really? They say shame. Who should we believe? The Prime Minister's safeguarding minister or Elizabeth?
What did you feel about your words being quoted in Prime Minister's questions?
The problem with the grooming gangs, with child sexual exploitation as a whole, is it's always been about politics. It's never about standing together and sorting the problem out. You know, this is something that affects everybody, regardless. And I have always said that. And I feel that if we were all together fighting the same cause and doing the right thing, we'd be a lot stronger as a country.
When you heard Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, yesterday say that the claims that the scope of the inquiry is going to be widened, for instance, were false, what did you think then?
It's not false. We've all had an email with it, with the proposed questions that was going to be asked at that meeting, and it were there.
Do you trust that Jess Phillips can salvage this process?
I've gone through a journey about what I think about Jess Phillips. So I've gone from feeling sorry for her because she's done a lot of good work in the past, to recently I'm thinking she's way above her head and she's become quite chaotic. Now this is a massive job, and my take on it is if you're not up to the job, resign.
She would say that this is all about the victims, and she wants you back. The Home Secretary says they want you back. The Prime Minister would like you to be back in this process. Do you see a way back for you?
They'd have to pull something very impressive for me to even think about it. Right about now, no. One of the other reasons that I resigned was because I was fearful that I'd become complicit in silencing victims, and I am not prepared to do that.
Elizabeth, thanks for your time. Thank you.
Well, the former policeman Jim Gamble, who was one of those named as a possible chair but withdrew this afternoon, joins me from Belfast. Jim Gamble, thanks very much for joining us this evening. We're desperately trying to work out what has gone wrong here. You heard Elizabeth there, who had real reservations about the fact that you were a police officer. Was it just simply wrong from the get-go to have as the two candidates a former social worker and a former police officer? Was it just tone deaf?
Well, you know, you can't say that, and I absolutely respect Elizabeth, and so much of what she says resonates with me. What I'd like to say first, just to address the issue of the meeting, I was not aware that questions had to be pre-proofed, and there was nothing orchestrated about my answers. I had no idea what I was going to be asked, and I basically spoke, from both my head and heart. So I think, we talk about occupation. The critical thing here isn't occupation, it's character. And if you want to look at a judge, you want to look at a police officer, you want to look at a social worker, you want to look at a teacher, you want to look at any other professional from health or the third sector. It's not going to be about the organisation they were part of. You've got to judge their character. And you judge that not on what they say using fine words at any particular moment in time, but by looking back at what they've already done. So I'm talked about as a police officer. I resigned in protest of what Theresa May was doing 15 years ago to do with child protection.
Just to be clear, from the victim's perspective, and you all know this, they have felt, many of them, if not most of them, brutally let down by the police in some horrific ways, brutally let down by social workers. So occupation does matter to many of the survivors.
Yes, I understand that. But what I'm saying is you're going to have to go beyond that. Because if you want to deliver change, you need people involved in this who understand the system from the inside. So let me give you an example. I revisited the review carried out nationally on Arthur Labinjo Hughes, because the public statements were that the first review said these were systems problems. Meetings didn't take place when they should have taken place. I was brought in to re-review it. And what I said was West Midlands Police have failed. If they had done what they should have done when they got evidence of potential actual bodily harm of a child, Arthur would still be alive. So you need to look at how people have challenged in the past.
Okay.
And who else are you going to get? If you bring someone in from outside that doesn't understand the system.
Absolutely, that is a key question. And part of the problem, as you identify in your letter explaining why you've stepped down, is what you call a highly charged and toxic environment surrounding this. Briefly explain how you would describe or analyse that toxic environment, and who is to blame for it?
Well, I think everyone is to blame for it except victims and survivors. They've been treated as a political football in this, as far as I'm concerned. One of the things Elizabeth said that I couldn't agree with more is that, people need to get in the room. They need to be there together. There needs to be a single purpose to do what can be done to fix this. And classically, what you see playing out in Parliament is petty party political point scoring, whereas actually they all agree that there should be an inquiry. So for goodness sake, let's accept it's taken too long and it's far too late. But now that we're here, get in a room and agree that children and young people are the priority, and stop the public football match using victims and survivors as the ball.
But when you talk about bad actors, as it were, and the survivors being fed misinformation, Elizabeth makes it quite clear. She has come to a decision herself. The women are quite clear. They understand the landscape here. They don't like what's going on, so they're walking away. They don't want to be told that they're somehow being influenced or manipulated by bad actors. They know too well what being manipulated is all about.
Well, look, at the end of the day, I absolutely accept what Elizabeth says. However, I believe that when the ether is filled with misinformation, when people describe others as, how was I described by some people online? The cover-up king, the person that's being brought in to mask the behaviours of the police. Now, that's patently untrue. And you cannot talk about one or two survivors. I made a commitment to them in that meeting that I've stood by, that if I could not win the confidence of all of the survivors in that group, that I would step aside and let someone else come forward. The majority of the victims and survivors in that room, I did have their confidence. But it's important to me that I had all of it, and that's why I have stepped back.
Very briefly, if you would, that issue of confidence is absolutely key. Victims and survivors, some of them are calling on the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, to resign. If survivors have lost faith in someone like Jess Phillips, who has staked her entire political career on understanding and fighting for survivors of all types of abuse, does that mean that this inquiry is finished? That government has completely lost the trust here?
No, the inquiry cannot be finished. It's far too important. And at the end of the day, at no stage did Jess Phillips or the Home Secretary or anyone else from that matter say to me, we need to dilute these terms of reference. We need to make it wider. We need to ignore race. At no stage, quite to the contrary. So that's where I think misinformation is used and is amplified by people to suit their own agenda.
Jim Campbell, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. Thank you. Well, earlier I spoke to the barrister Ivor Frank, who was on the panel of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which was set up in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal. He's told us he has put his name forward as the candidate to chair the grooming gang inquiry.
I wrote to the Home Secretary and to Jess Phillips on the 15th of October when I learned that they were having difficulties agreeing on a chair, to indicate that I'd be willing to chair it if I were invited to do so. I haven't actually heard anything back yet.
You're a barrister, you're part of a criminal justice system which will have seen many of those women, those survivors, hope for justice and not get it. We've also seen many victims themselves criminalised. How would you defend your part of the criminal justice system in terms of wanting to do this role?
I don't think I've got anything to defend in that. What I can tell you is that in terms of the confidence of victims and survivors, they know that I was brought up in care myself from the age of 3 to 16, that I didn't have the advantage of a particularly good start in life, and that I have made my own way in the world without being part of any establishment at all. It's impossible to be a lawyer without being seen as being part of the establishment, but I can assure you I'm not.
And can I just ask you finally, on the ICSA inquiry, it took a very long time. Many of the recommendations have still not been put into place. Won't many victims and survivors feel the danger is that this is repeated all over again?
Well, bear in mind that the terms of reference of the ICSA inquiry are very, very much more extensive than the ones that I understand it for the grooming gangs inquiry. You remember the ICSA was required to go back for nearly 100 years, looking at past events over every institution in the country. It wasn't just an issue of grooming gangs. And we managed to do that by publishing our terms of reference for each strand of the inquiry and our criteria for selection for that. And victims and survivors contributed to that. So there was a consensus when we did that we had dealt with those matters which were central to most people's concerns. So I don't actually think there's anything that we should be too much concerned about that. And people also should remember that actually many of our recommendations have in fact already been implemented.
But I'm going to have to end it there, but thank you very much for talking to us.
My pleasure, thank you.